Module 3, Checklists and Taxiing to the Active Runway. By now you should have downloaded the checklist PDFs, the parts of the airplane, and the dashboard or the panel. For all the dials and switches that you'll find in an airplane, no one can know how to set them all or in what order out of personal memory. We have to follow checklists in every phase of our flight, from startup to shutdown. In this module, we will be introduced to our checklist card. It has everything that we need to check in every phase of our flight. All pilots use checklists all the time. Some have thicker checklists than we do. That way they don't forget an important setting. Once we get the hang of using our checklist for startup, we will get our airplane to the active runway by driving along the ground, called taxiing. This can be harder than you think. So please refer to your own downloaded checklist. There's 2 parts to it. I've got mine printed on both sides. And I also want you to have the parts of the plane document, because we're going to be talking about some of those things, like flaps. Your hand's position will always be the left hand on the yoke, except when starting the engine, and the right hand to manage the switches and the engine controls. Just as you would learn proper position for a musical instrument, this is crucial for flying. During our taxi, our actual movement across the ground, and our first 500 feet of takeoff, we keep our right hand on the throttle the whole time. And during landing, we do the same. We fly with our left hand, and we do everything else with our right hand. You are sitting in the pilot seat, the left-hand seat. Your instructor sits in the right seat. So when you look over at your instructor, it's this view here. So they have to learn to use both hands for demonstrations. Their left hand is on the throttle, their right hand is on the yoke. Lesson 1, checklists. Well, let me introduce you to my simplified checklist for the Cessna 172. This is a scaled down version of the real thing, as we don't need to check as many things in the simulator. And I've got it printed for both sides, as I mentioned, and I've added some more things too. But you can use a real checklist if you wish, but you'll find many of those items you might not understand yet. So I made a simpler one in this beginner course. A good example of real checklists are checking the oil dipstick and physically stepping up on the wing strut to look in the fuel tanks. Also, checking the quality of the fuel with a tester and a sample of fuel from 3 different places. We certainly can't do that in the simulator, right? So there's some differences there, isn't there? This checklist card should be downloaded, printed, and even laminated, as we use it every time we fly. And if it's, it's only paper, so it'll get frayed and torn. So hold it in your left hand as you manage your switches and controls in your right hand. And maybe even keep a thumb on each checklist area or near the section that you're on. And that way you won't forget where you are, all right? Start by looking at the picture of the Toronto City Centre Airport, or the airport diagram. It has the convenient radio talking frequencies that we'll need to use, but we're not yet. We're not going to do the frequencies yet. We'll have a whole lesson on radio work and how to manage it. But you'll notice the ELV251 at the top of your airport diagram. That is the elevation of the airport, as we learned earlier. That means when we touch down later, upon landing, our altimeter will be indicating 251 feet on the ground, same as at the start. So start your flight simulator with your plane on the tarmac now, a parking spot, all right, instead of the active runway, as we would in real flight training. If your engine's running, turn the mag switch or the on-off switch, the left-right switch, turn it to the off position, all right? We are now ready to approach our airplane as we would in a real flight school. Let's look at the pre-start section. We simply perform the checks as they're listed. We're going to do everything on this first page before we're ready for takeoff, and it gets easier after a while. Planes have to be safe, and we have to know that they'll perform before we get up in the air. So we start with what's called the external check. Do you see that under pre-start? External check. We actually do a walk around on the outside of the airplane. This is harder to do in the simulator. Certainly we can use external views and our hat switch to look around the plane. But we know in our heads that it's fine in the simulator. So many students feel this is a waste of time. It is essential on a real plane. So the first thing we do is open the left door, reach in and turn on the master switch. We're not going to get in the plane. We just reach in, we turn on the master switch, and we lower the flaps all the way down. Then we turn off the master switch and we step back out to look around the plane. So with the flaps lowered, we can visually inspect the hinge joints and the linkage. During our external check, we're actually checking everything. We're looking around the whole plane, and we have a sequence, a proper sequence right in the pilot operating handbook that tells us what to do. So we're checking the gas, the oil, the propeller, the cargo door is closed, the rivets and the screws are secure. We don't want anything coming loose from vibration while we're flying. And we can't get out and check that gas cap while we're flying. For now, lower those flaps for the walk around. The flaps switch is a handy flap-looking switch. If you had retractable wheels, well, that switch would have a round wheel on it. So this looks like a flap. We push our flap switch all the way down, and you will see the flaps move all the way down with an electric motor sound that moved them. Now use your S key to get that outside view, and use your hat switch to look all the way around the plane. Just hold it in one position and let it circle, as if we're doing a walk around. You'll notice while you're doing that walk around that your flaps are all the way down. They're noticeable. They're barn doors hanging off both wings. That's what they are. And this will help slow us down later. We'll see how to use that in slow flight and other things, all right? So now we'll get back into the plane. Use your S key, get back inside. The next section that we're going to look at is called Flight Controls Free, all right? So that's how far we are. I know it's taken me a while to get there, but this is important stuff, you guys. We simply use the 8 count while we're moving the control surfaces with the yoke. All right, we'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, and we do this for every surface that has to move. We're making sure they all move the way they're supposed to. It's crucial once we're flying, of course, right? So take a look at this video while I describe it. We look out the left window and we watch the surface of the wing while we turn the yoke. Full left, then full right. 1, 2. All right, the left aileron should move up and down. Then we look out the right window and watch the surface of the wing. Well, we turn the yoke again, the same thing again, full left, full right, 3, 4. The right aileron should move up and down. Now we look back over our shoulder at the elevator, which is the small wing there in the back, all right, and we'll pull the yoke all the way into our chest and all the way back out as we count 5, 6. It's like an exercise video, isn't it? The elevator should move up and then down. That's the small horizontal wing at the tail of the plane, right? So, and then finally we test the rudder, or the big vertical fin behind you, while we're still looking back. All right, and we press our left foot to the floor, then our right foot to the floor, and we watch that rudder move back and forth. If we have pedals, of course, right? And we would say 7, 8. Now, in this beginner course, it isn't compulsory to have rudder pedals, but if you have them, you'll see the effect. If you don't have them, we'll just push our left foot to the floor and our right foot for practice, 7, 8. All right, so you'll need pedals in the intermediate course, and the habit should start now. So you might need to unlink the rudder from the ailerons in the settings page if you have the rudder pedals. All right, so let's take a look. So that is our flight controls free check. This is to ensure there are no seized cables or no surface locks in place. Surface locks are used on some airplanes to keep them secure. Let's look at the next item, trim check for takeoff. The trim wheel, as you've noticed already in the last module, is important to reduce the fatigue of holding your yoke in or out for long periods of time. We trim for every flight attitude change. Then we can fly hands-free with only slight pressure on the yoke to correct drifting. You can fly with a couple fingers. So we use the expression trim it out. Our simulator yoke has springs in it to give us the pressure and tries to center itself when we let go. In an actual plane, there are no visible springs, but the air movement around the control surfaces gives us the pressure. So by trimming it, we are moving another control surface to counteract the air pressure on the elevator while flying. This enables us to trim it out and maintain the altitude and the speed that we desire. In this case, we are not flying yet, but we will be taking off. So we trim it for takeoff, the takeoff position. This enables us to literally leave the runway once we are fast enough. The last pilot might have left it all the way up or all the way down, and you don't want that surprise as you're trying to lift off the runway before you visit the lake up ahead. Remember, we're flying out of Toronto Island Airport with water all around, right? So position your mouse cursor, the arrow, over the trim wheel on your dashboard and use your mouse wheel to move it up and down. We've done this already before. All right, in this case, the tick marks will line up for TO, takeoff. I could have introduced you to trim for takeoff in your first flight, but it would have added another complexity to a fast, easy first flight. Let's look at the avionics switch, off, all right, off. This is to ensure a jolt of startup electricity doesn't mess up with the electronics when you start the engine. We'll turn it back on after the engine's running. We want the engine purring, the alternator supplying a steady voltage and current before we turn on the avionics switch again. That's further down in our checklist. Fuel selector on both. This is a check to ensure we have the safety of both wing tanks for fuel during takeoff. There's fuel in both of those tanks, gravity fed. And if there were a malfunction in one of them, we would still have fuel from the other. That's the idea behind it. The next checklist item, record Hobbs time. This is how flight schools get paid. It is also necessary for building your flight hours. Actual recording of the Hobbs meter. You notice it's on the tachometer? It's measured in tenths of the hour and starts running the second the engine is running. It is based on oil pressure, but it records how long the engine was running, even if sitting on the ground. We need to record Hobbs time for the mechanics of the plane, so they can do planned and scheduled maintenance based on the usage time. So record it now, and again when we finish every flight. You will need this for your logbook later, as you should record every flight to build your hours. Now we're ready to start the engine. Isn't this exciting? Are you getting excited about this? Engine start section. All right, if you take a look at the engine start section, the very first thing is throttle open 1/4 inch. Now the throttle on a Cessna 172 is a push-pull black knob right on the panel, just like in the picture of it on your simulator. And we pull it all the way out for idle and pushed all the way in for full throttle. So we pull it all the way out and then we push it in just 1/4 inch. Sometimes we use our finger to figure that out. And we give the engine some gas to get started. All right? And then we'll have our hand on it while we start it and we'll be adjusting it. On the CH yoke, the throttle is all the way back toward you for idle and all the way forward for full throttle. So we bring it back and then forward just a bit. When we do start the engine, not yet, but when we do start it, it will be our left hand on the key switch and our right hand on the throttle for immediate adjustment. All right? Next checklist item, mixture rich. The red knob on a real panel or on the outside knob on the CH Products yoke is for fuel mixture, so that we don't starve the engine for fuel during startup. We put it in the rich position. This means the engine will get all the fuel that it needs until we fine tune it. This knob on the far end over here, put it full forward for rich. So it will be moved 1/2 inch for taxiing, and at higher altitudes we'll lean it to the mixture to be, we'll lean the mixture to be more efficient. Push this lever all the way to the dashboard for rich. And on our yoke, we'll push the outside lever all the way away from you. Okay? The next checklist item, brakes on. Okay, well, I might as well hold on to this yoke for a second. Now we can use the control period keys, control and period keys. We can use our toe brakes if we have pedals, or the emergency brake, which is the control period key. All right? And brakes when you're landing and when you're needing to stop while you're taxiing, we can use the red button right here on the yoke. All right, it's on our left hand, hidden behind here. That's a brakes button by default. All right, and we can use that to slow down while we're taxiing too. All right, but control period, we'll put on the parking brake, and then we're free to use our hands for other things as we go along. All right, the next checklist item. All right, we put the brakes on so that it'll keep us from moving after we start the engine. So now we're ready to start the engine. So now we're going to call prop clear, or some people just call clear with your own voice out an open window. Well, it's true, we still do this. And even in wintertime, in an open window, we open the window of the plane, we yell clear, and we shut the window of the plane, and then we start the engine. Others nearby will know that we're spinning our propeller and there'll be some wind generated. All right, in our simulator, we don't have to yell, but say it out loud for practice. All right, clear. We say this just before we start the engine and start that propeller spinning. All right, master switch on. Here we go. Now this is the master switch. This isn't the start key. This is the master switch. This will power up the panel and supply power for starting the engine, similar to a car. We're just turning on the battery is what we're doing. So there's a bat switch and an alt switch. Just turn both on. In a real plane, we do an alternator check by turning the alt switch on after we see the alt light check. No worries here in the beginner simulator, but our alternator is just fine. The alternator is run by the engine, and it charges our battery while supplying power to everything else, just like in a car. Auxiliary fuel pump switch on, maximum 3 seconds. All right, now this is the fuel pump that's used in the newer planes. All right, and what they're doing there is supplying some fuel with an actual pump to the engine to get it ready to go. In the older planes, which are mostly the ones that I fly, in the older planes we have a primer pump, and it just says prime on it, and that is used to pump 3 times, and then we lock it in place, all right, on the older planes. Both methods put enough gas into the engine to get it started. And now we get to the point. Ignition switch start. This is fun. It is. I know it's a bit drawn out, you guys, but you'll get the hang of it. It'll go a lot faster. We're just going through it one by one right now. All right. When you turn that ignition switch to the start position, the propeller should rotate once or twice and then start right up. That's why you keep your hand on the throttle, because now as soon as it starts, we want to adjust that throttle to no more than 1,000 to start with and let this thing warm up. Most planes will settle in at a nice 600 RPM, but adjust with your right hand to 1,000 on the tachometer. This will help keep oil pressure and vacuum in the green after engine start.